today's top boxing news.
Okay, it's time to get to it. My final thoughts on tomorrow's big welterweight showdown. Approximately 5 years in the making, it's finally here. If you've been keeping up with this channel any time in the last 5 years, you'll already know what I'm about to say and who I've got winning. I've been covering this fight the last couple of weeks since its official announcement from as many angles as possible. The nuts and bolts of the fight, what the fight might look like, as well as the intangibles, what either fan base has to think about going into it.
So, here today, for the last time, let's talk about the fight.
This will be the condensed version. How do I expect the fight to play out? What's the aesthetic? And what do I expect to see? In the opening rounds, if history is any indicator of things to come, and it usually is, Errol Spence Jr. will get off to a fast start the same way he got off to a fast start in the Yordenis Lugas fight.
That fight. By round 4, Errol was already stepping into his jab and throwing punches in bunches, attempting to break down Yordenis Lugas from the inside out. I expect to see that tomorrow. I expect to see him try. The difference being that Terence Crawford is a shorter and much sharper puncher than Yordenis Lugas with better legs, better feet, better movement. Some may be surprised to hear that I think this fight will have shades of the David Evanesian fight that Terence Crawford participated in late last year. David Evanesian, a mid-range to inside fighter, just like Errol Spence, though not competing at the same level as Errol Spence. All the same, an aggressive customer. Like Errol Spence is an aggressive customer, I actually believe the pressure that David Evanesian puts on his opponents, that was adequate preparation for this fight, because that's the same kind of pressure that Errol tries to put on guys. He just does it in a better way. But he puts guys under pressure with volume, with activity, with aggression. David Evanesian is a physical fighter, and so is Errol. At the start, I believe this fight between Terence and Errol will have shades of that fight between Terence and David. I believe that Terence will come out fighting out of the southpaw stance, and even if he doesn't, even if he comes out orthodox, I believe he may end up switching over to southpaw after a couple of punches get in, after a couple of punches land. That is, unless he comes out southpaw and stays southpaw. And out of the southpaw stance, I anticipate he's going to be probing and pumping out that jab, giving up some ground and looking to create space as Errol advances. Doubling and tripling up on his own jab, looking to step into it to close the distance and bring over big hooks upstairs, body shots downstairs. Errol is a very accomplished body puncher. I've no doubts he's going to look to go there. I believe that in the first 3, maybe the first 4, Terence Crawford will spend a lot of time moving around back on the ropes as Errol tries to close the distance. And Errol may get in with some good stuff. I've said it many times before. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Errol Spence Jr. have an early lead in the first 3 to 4 rounds behind volume, behind activity, and being the more prolific puncher, the busier boxer. I can see it. It's important to note that Errol Spence Jr.'s best bet to make a dent in Terence Crawford is at the start of the match, in the beginning, because as the fight progresses, it doesn't actually favor him not having fought in over a year. Remember how Josh Taylor got started in a Lopez fight? He got off to a good start, then he started to fade. And that's what inactivity does to you. Errol Spence Jr. has not boxed in over 12 months, and the pace that he normally sets for a fight, it requires a lot. Physically. It requires a lot. It wears on you. But at the start, I expect Errol Spence Jr. to be the busier fighter of the two, and I expect the judges to give him maximum consideration for it. I expect that Errol might win the first 3, maybe even 4 rounds. He might. Between rounds 1 and 4, maybe even rounds 1 and 5, what you're going to see from Terence is pot-shotting downstairs. To take the air out of the tires. Sneaky body shots. Sneaky backhands to Errol Spence Jr.'s midsection, mid-range to inside. Sneaky right hooks, short ones, from out of the southpaw stance, just under Errol Spence Jr.'s elbow. Uppercuts up the middle. Errol Spence Jr. wants to be mindful of those uppercuts. He's susceptible to them because he comes in at a slight crouch, bending at the waist, bending at the knees. He's susceptible to that punch. We saw that in the Ugas fight. Ugas got through with some decent uppercuts. If Ugas can touch you with an interesting uppercut, Terence Crawford can do one better. But I expect Errol's going to look strong in the first quarter. Terence Crawford coming alive in the second. The difference between Terence in the first quarter and the second quarter, I think, is Terence is going to put more punches together in the second quarter. Engage more. Throw more. I expect a large crowd reaction. Errol Spence Jr. is a very sharp puncher, mid-range to inside within close quarters, but he throws wider shots than Terence Crawford that are easier to counter, and we did see a glimpse of that in the Ugas fight, as he was on the receiving end of those those uppercuts and hooks around the guard.
Ugas didn't throw much in that fight, but what he did throw and what did land, it did get Errol's attention. And Ugas is no Terrence Crawford. Terrence's punches are
Shorter.
harder to see coming and much harder to counter because you don't see them.
From Errol, I expect a lot of activity, a lot of combinations from the start into the middle. From Terrence, I expect a lot of pot-shotting in the first quarter and more combinations in the second.
Conscious effort to always put something downstairs, always touch Errol to the body, whether it's a stab to the body with the backhand or a right hook under the elbow.
Out of the southpaw stance.
I've heard it said in several quarters already that Terrence Crawford's success in this match is contingent upon him being able to deal with Errol Spence Jr.'s jab. It's a good jab and it's a consistent jab. He uses it a lot.
But if Terrence is fighting southpaw, the same as Errol, he can take that jab away with a counter left hand over the top.
Kind of like Alicia Baumgartner took Michaela Mayer's jab away with a counter right hand over the top, them being both orthodox fighters, whereas these two, they might both be fighting southpaw tomorrow.
Errol's jab can be taken away. There are a number of ways Terrence can take it away. He can counter that jab with a backhand over the top, or he can beat those feet.
Stay just out of striking distance of Errol Spence Jr. Keep him moving. Don't let him set his feet.
Pivot off his jab.
Don't stay in one spot. What Errol wants to do is close the distance and pin his opponent down so he can set those feet and unload. If Terrence Crawford keeps him moving,
Doesn't get the chance.
anticipate those sneaky body shots that Terrence Crawford gets in there in the first quarter are going to start to catch up to Errol Spence at the end of the second.
Going into the third.
Slow him down, and they won't look like much. They won't look like much at first, but they'll catch up to Errol in the third quarter.
Expect the pace of the match to pick up in the second quarter going into the third.
That's where things are going to get interesting. That's where we'll see exchanges and trading from both, and I anticipate that in either the end of the third quarter or the beginning of the fourth, Terrence Crawford will close the show, likely off a counter uppercut in the pocket, mid-range to inside where Errol likes to be.
Errol's a busier puncher than Terrence Crawford, and that normally works for him. He opens up more, but against Terrence, that just means he's open more, open to be countered.
Expect that Terrence Crawford's movement, his mobility and agility will take something off of Errol Spence Jr.'s punches.
Not just gonna sit there like a lump like Yordanis Lugas did, and he's not a come-forward aggressive pressure fighter like Sean Porter. Terrence Crawford is characteristically a harder opponent to find, a moving target.
And a counterpuncher, a sharp one that you don't want to let him hit you.
It's not saying that Terrence Crawford will evade the pocket altogether, that he won't trade punches occasionally with Errol, but he knows that that's where Errol wants to be. You don't want to give him that.
Not all the time.
He'll mix it up with him in spots. And somewhere in between rounds 9, 10, and 11, that's where I think Terrence closes the show. That's where I think he stops him. Mid-range to inside off a counter uppercut that Errol doesn't see.
As Errol is once again trying to crowd the pocket and get off body shots, I anticipate he's going to get caught. He's going to get caught late, he's going to get hurt, and Terrence will finish him.
Terrence has proven to be a very strong finisher at welterweight.
He has to finish Errol Spence Jr. If he doesn't want to get stuck with any kind of funny business, he has to close the show. He's got to knock him out. Moreover, irrespective of crooked judges and favorable outcomes,
Errol is a busier puncher than Terrence round by round. He does throw more punches in a round than Terrence does.
that by itself is enough for Errol to amass an early lead that carries out through the rest of the fight, to whereas Terrence Crawford is the one playing catch-up because he's not as busy a fighter as Errol Spence Jr. And even if Terrence can take something off of Errol's work rate,
To slow the fight down.
if you're spending most of this fight with your back on the ropes and he's spending most of the fight with his back towards the center, it's going to give off the appearance that he's the ring general. He's the predator and you're the prey. The judges may favor him in that department. So Terrence, he really does have to stop this guy. He really does have to close the show. He can't afford to let it go to the cards.
Silver lining is I don't think he will.
For the last 5 years, I've been convinced that Terrence Crawford would stop Errol Spence Jr., and that was before the car accident, before the retina injury, addressing the intangibles.
Because we've already talked about the aesthetic of the match and what I expect it to look like.
If you want to still go with Spence, that's your prerogative. I'm not selling it to you. I'm not trying to convince you. I can only tell you what I think, and if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, before Errol got into that car accident, I already had Terrence Crawford beating him. afterwards,
that much more convinced.
you don't get flung out of a Ferrari, land on your face and lose your fronts, and come back the same guy. It doesn't work like that. I believe that the detached retina that he suffered, the one that benched him in 2021, I believe those are residual injuries that have stayed with him stemming from the car accident. The fact that this man has only fought once in the last 2 years, I think, is a testament to what his body's been through.
Addressing the intangibles.
Been well over a year since Errol Spence Jr. had a fight, and for a physical fighter that fights at a fast pace,
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, he hadn't fought in a year ahead of the Ugas fight, and he did fine with Ugas, but this ain't Ugas.
you're thinking he hadn't fought in a year in the Danny Garcia fight, but this ain't Danny Garcia. This is a more complete fighter than any of those fighters.
And he has fought in the last 12 months.
Addressing the intangibles, it was Errol Spence Jr.'s fans that gave Terrence Crawford a hard time for fighting David Avanesian late last year. And David Avanesian is, in fact, a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, a physical fighter. So not only has Terrence seen action in the last 12 months, it was against a physical, gutting, and gritty fighter like Errol Spence. Perhaps not the same caliber as Errol,
But he is aggressive like Errol, and he does like to fight in the pocket like Errol.
Terrence Crawford fought a mid-range to inside fighter less than 12 months ago. Less than 12 months later, he's fighting a guy that ain't fought in over a year.
Guy who's going into this fight saying that he's outgrown this division. He's outgrown welterweight. We talked about that in my previous video. What happens to a fighter when he overstays his welcome at a given weight?
I'll tell you what happens to a fighter when he overstays his welcome at a given weight, which you saw happen to Jarrett Hurd at the hands of Julian Williams. Julian Williams was never known for having cinder blocks for fists, and Jarrett Hurd was never known for having a glass jaw. Quite the opposite. He was known as one of the more durable fighters at 154. But one fateful day, it's like the man's chin evaporated, and that is the byproduct of overstaying your welcome at a given weight. Cutting too much.
Boiling down too much, too many times, over time. I believe that little by little, we've been seeing this in Errol Spence Jr.'s fights. When Danny Garcia knocked his mouthpiece out of his mouth, when Yordenis Ugas rattled him 2 or 3 times.
Also knocked his mouthpiece out of his mouth. For some reason, Errol Spence Jr. lost focus in the midst of being attacked. He loses focus, goes looking for his gum shield, and gets rocked again.
Gets sent careening into the ropes. The ropes were the only thing that held him up.
I don't actually think Errol Spence Jr. has the same focus and the same cunning as Terrence Crawford. I don't. And I don't actually think he's as durable here today in 2023 as he used to be.
Because according to him, he's outgrown welterweight.
It's from the horse's mouth. I don't have to wonder about it anymore. Neither do you.
You outgrow a division, you do realize that your punch resistance suffers for it. Your power starts to wane, and your ability to take power, take a punch, that wanes too.
I believe we've been seeing Errol's punch resistance wane for a while now, and it's about to all come to a head tomorrow night.
Addressing the winner of the fight and whether or not they have a legitimate claim towards being the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport, I really think that depends on who the winner is. If the winner is Terrence Crawford,
Well, he has a legitimate claim, if he wins, towards being the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport on the premise that he's been a champion at 3 weights, Ring Magazine and Lineal in 2 already. If he wins tomorrow, that makes 3, and that would make him a 2-time undisputed champion in the 4-belt era, which is very, very difficult to do and requires a lot of skill, which is what pound-for-pound lists are all about. It's skill you're attempting to gauge, after all.
and what testaments there are to it based on my own criterion.
Terrence would definitely have a case if he wins tomorrow night. But if it's Errol, it's a little different, because while that might be the biggest win of his career, and that might make him a Ring Magazine and Lineal champion, undisputed.
Well, Alexander Usyk's been undisputed, among other things.
He has.
Now, Eno has been undisputed.
Jermell Charlo's been undisputed. What has Errol Spence Jr. done that they haven't done? These are fighters that have been champions at multiple weights on top of being undisputed champions.
Devin Haney's been undisputed. Canelo Alvarez has been undisputed, but Canelo's a 4-division champion. What's Errol?
Errol has only ever been a champion at 1 weight, so if by some chance Errol were to pull it off tomorrow, he doesn't have a strong enough argument, not based on this criterion. He doesn't have a strong enough argument to be catapulted to #1. Terrence does. He has that argument. He's been a champion at 3 weights. If he wins, he will have been Ring Magazine and Lineal champion in all 3, 3 and undisputed in 2.
So it breaks down on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. I don't know about yours, but that's mine.
To mine's breakdown, I've had to hold off on updating the list because of Inoue versus Fulton, because of tomorrow's fight, the upcoming fight with Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois. Usyk is ranked on the list for being a multi-weight champion, for being a smaller fighter that moved up to heavyweight. He's not a career heavyweight.
Pound-for-pound lists really aren't for heavyweights. The only reason Usyk is there is because he's not a career heavyweight. He's a smaller fighter that moved up there.
Thereby proving that in spite of not being a heavyweight, his skills are up to scratch. His skills are on par to where he can hang and he can bang with the big boys.
Comprendo, friendo.
What about Teofimo Lopez? Newly crowned 2-division WBO Ring Magazine champion Teofimo Lopez. He deserves some consideration as well, as he has decided not to drop his title. He's decided he's not going to retire. Not that anybody believed him. There's been a lot of movement and
There's a lot of updates to make, so I've held off on updating the list until a certain number of contests have already taken place.
Addressing tomorrow's fight, if Terrence wins, based on what he's already done so far, he does have a legitimate claim towards being the number 1 or number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. It really would be between him and Naoya Inoue. But if it's Spence, if by some chance Spence pulls it off, that's not enough to rank him ahead of Canelo Alvarez or Usyk or Inoue.
No!
A lot of people have a lot riding on this fight. Let's not pretend that being a Spence fan or being a Crawford fan hasn't become polarized over time. We all know that it has.
But polarization aside, fanboys aside, politics aside, and all that jazz, I have Terrence Crawford winning the fight because I genuinely believe he's the better boxer of the two, more capable of making in-fight adjustments in real time.
A stronger finisher than Errol Spence Jr. I don't think for a second fighters like Danny Garcia and Mikey Garcia would have been able to go the distance had they fought Crawford, but they fought Errol.
It is what it is.
And Terrence isn't stupid. Neither is Brian Bomac McIntyre. They know they're venturing into enemy territory, that the judges will give Errol Spence Jr. as much consideration as possible. Thus, you have to take the judges out of it. And there's only one way to do that.
Know what you have to do.
Do it! Do it! Do it!